Welcome to the New Stock Music Podcast, brought to you by Media Music Now and Beanstalk Audio, with your host, Lee Pritchard.
Welcome to podcast number 4. In this episode, I'm going to be discussing the pricing of stock music. Is it too expensive? Why is it so varied? So that's coming up, and to get started, here is a piece I've written. This piece was inspired by a film I was watching called Chaos. It's an old film, and when it got to the end, in the credits, there was this piece that started with a bass sound, and it just inspired me to write this piece that you're listening to now. And this piece of mine is called In the Shadows. It's a bit of espionage, quite spy orientated, I think. I think it'll work well with quite a few different types of films.
The New Stock Music Podcast.
So why is stock music so varied in price? Well, the answer I'm going to give you is based on my experience running music libraries and writing stock music. And what I can say is, before the internet took off, it was really expensive. Stock music was known as library music back then, and it used to come on CDs, so companies would get CDs sent to them, and when they used a track, they'd have to go through the traditional copyright collecting societies, and it could end up being like £100, £200, £300. It was expensive. The UK copyright protection societies were MCPS and PRS at the time, and you can go and look at their websites. I think they merged recently, but you can look at their website and you can see the kind of prices that they charge now, and it was the same sort of prices back then. And then as the internet started to pick up, a few sites appeared, and this is probably like in the, very late 90s, early 2000s, and a few sites started to appear that were selling stock music, and there's no set price. There's no like rules or legislation for these types of things, so owners of the sites would just come up with their own prices, and people tend to look at competition when they're setting up a business, and the standard price that emerged seems to be around $30 for a track. Now that covered business use, and at the time business use was really corporate videos, TV programs, and on-hold music maybe, and there weren't so many uses, so it kind of stuck, and that was that. Back in the early days of the online music libraries, or the stock music libraries, or the royalty-free music libraries, depending on which way it was termed, all means the same thing. They were all composer-owned, so the focus was on composers earning a living from their music, and so that's changed over the years. A lot of the big libraries now are owned by big companies, and it's all more about keeping shareholders happy and making a profit, rather than looking after the composers that are supplying the music. When we started Media Music Now in 2005, there weren't so many websites selling music, so we were one of maybe 10, and we sort of followed suit really. We did try originally to charge more because the composers that were supplying the music, a number of them were complaining about the low price, i.e. $30, and so we did try higher prices, but customers just wouldn't pay it, so we followed suit and went with the standard pricing. And then what's happened is, over the years, the likes of YouTube, that also started in 2005 and now is really popular, and there's many platforms now where you can, make a video and post it. The users of the music started to change. So we started to get people doing it as a hobby, just for their own enjoyment, and really they were not going to pay $30 a track. And so when cheaper options started to come about, where new libraries appeared and created their own pricing structure, we end up now in a situation where there's hundreds of libraries and they all charge different prices, and some now charge subscriptions, and the value of the music is so degraded that it's not worth composers working on it in many respects, because the time it takes to create a piece of music is no good if you're just getting pennies back for it. And it's not like mainstream artists where, these pennies will add up to millions of pounds. Much of the stock music that's written gets used maybe a few times in its lifetime. And composers are just really trying to create a bulk of catalogue that will then be picked, hopefully, on a regular basis and give them a trickle of income. Now, with the old pricing, that was really achievable, but now with the new pricing, it's not as achievable. So it's a tricky one. Prices are all over the place, and it's not necessarily helpful to the industry. There are many composers now that are just part-time because they can't really do it full-time based on the income that's being generated. So that's a problem, really, because we need our composers to be talented people that are progressing with their careers and working full-time on their talent. My view, and this is my view as a composer and as a music library owner, is that we need to charge accordingly to the person that's using the music. So, for example, if somebody's using it for business, they should pay what are typical business rates, really. If they're using it for a large advertising campaign, they should pay more for the fact that the music's being used in such a major way. And then YouTubers and people making videos for hobbies should pay less. So there should be a pricing structure for those different users that goes from low payment to higher payment. And I think all you can use unlimited subscriptions are really bad for the composer, because it means that the user pays a very low fee and uses as many tracks of music as they like, which then gives pennies to the composer for use of their music. What we've done with Beanstalk Audio, which is a library that just has my music in and music that I commission composers to write for me, we've created some very low prices for YouTubers and hobbyists. So we've got a limited license, and then there's a number of licenses, I don't know the number, it's maybe 10 licenses going all the way up to large-scale advertisements. And I think that's the way to be fair to the composer and the user. On our original website, Media Music Now, the music there comes mainly from hundreds of independent composers, and so it's not as simple to do it on that site, but we're looking at changing it on that site as well with the composer's consent. So we're trying to adapt and make music accessible for all, but also trying to make it worthwhile for the composers. Without the composers, there's no music, and composers are like anyone else with a job. They need to be able to do their job and pay their bills and put food on their tables.
The New Stock Music Podcast, brought to you by Media Music Now and Beanstalk Audio.
This piece is called Senses, and it starts with a nice piano, builds up, and it's inspirational, really. This is one of those happy tracks that you can clap along to. It's called Lift Me Higher. This is called New Morning. I'd say it's quite ambient. It makes me think of those foggy mornings in the winter in the UK, where you might be driving and you can't really see what's ahead of you. Quite mysterious in some aspects.
Stock Music Podcast, brought to you by Media Music Now and Beanstalk Audio.
This track is called Talking About. It reminds me of a track that was played in the 90s when I used to go to nightclubs. I can't remember the name of it, but it's got a sort of a dancey feel to it. Energetic, dance floor type music. This is called Ocean Life. It's very percussive. I'd say it's quite modern in style. You can imagine life drifting by while you're relaxing somewhere. Maybe you're on a yacht going across the Mediterranean in the sunshine.
The New Stock Music Podcast.
This track's called Always in the Distance. It's majestic. You can imagine it used on landscape videos, drone footage and that type of thing. It's quite emotional, ideal for discovery and travel.
The New Stock Music Podcast.
This is one of those tracks where you feel like you're going somewhere. You're picking yourself up and you're moving on. It's lifting you up. It's making you feel better. And it's happy. It's called Pick Yourself Up.
The New Stock Music Podcast.
Now this piece is quite upbeat really. I associate this with holidays and travel. I can imagine sat at a beach bar in the early evening, sipping a cocktail. It's called Beach Holidays, but I think you could use it with other things as well, like fashion, luxury, hotels, property. It's a very versatile piece, I think. So that's it for this episode. So I hope you've enjoyed the new music. If you've got any questions, do get in touch. Go to Beanstalk Audio to find all these pieces of music. You can find the links from our podcast page. And if you need any music exclusively for your brand, we do offer a number of exclusive options. So just get in touch if you've got any questions, and I look forward to speaking to you on the next podcast.
The New Stock Music Podcast, brought to you by Media Music Now and Beanstalk Audio.